Greetings all you movie junkies and entertainment lovers, and welcome to another ranked video. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Terminator franchise. The Terminator franchise has had a very interesting history, with there being multiple attempts to do different trilogies of films, with the first two films mainly being considered to be the best of the bunch, with the other sequels being very mixed and divided amongst fans. So I thought we would go back and take a look and see how I personally would rank the Terminator franchise. As I always point out with my list, that it's important to remember this is just my personal list of the way that I would rank the Terminator films. So coming in at number 6, at the bottom of the barrel, we have Terminator Genesis. From the trailers at least, it seemed like it was going more towards the look and feel of the first two movies compared to, Terminator Salvation, which was the film before this. It was also, of course, pulling a lot of shenanigans with the timelines and stuff, and all of that ultimately doesn't really make a lot of sense. This movie, just for me, is just really convoluted. That's just, if there's one word to describe Terminator Genesis, convoluted is the word that I would use. And it works somewhat well as a mindless sci-fi action movie, and it does have a lot of really fun, blockbuster action sequences, but ultimately the story and the plot of it and the way that it fits with the other movies or doesn't fit with the other movies is just very frustrating, and ultimately it doesn't really make a lick of sense when connecting to the other movies. And honestly, I think the best way to look at it is just as completely its own thing. There are some decent elements. I honestly actually really liked all of the stuff in the beginning with the future war, and honestly it was actually what I wanted out of one of the other movies, but we'll get to that in a second. I personally quite enjoyed the Arnold v Arnold fight, the two T-800s fighting, and I thought honestly the way that they did that sequence was pretty good. For the rest of the movie and the twists and stuff, it just didn't quite work out, and it also didn't hurt that they put so much of it in the trailers to the point where there just wasn't any real surprises when going to watch the movie. But it's not the worst movie ever made, but when it comes to the other films, I think overall it's the one that's the most weakest and convoluted. So that's Terminator Genesis at number 6. And then at number 5, we have Terminator Salvation. Was the first attempt of the last 3 reboots to start a new trilogy. I don't think this one is quite as bad as a lot of people make it out to be. This definitely stands out because it was the one where they actually decided to stop foregoing with the time travel nonsense and just have it be, in the future. Finally we're just gonna see the future war for what it is. And in that concept, I really like that, and I really like that they decided to go in that direction. But for me, the thing that really lets this one down is just honestly the overall look, feel, and aesthetic of it, and the fact that it just doesn't look like the future war that we've been presented with in the previous movies. For me, it's like, if you're gonna do the future war, just do the future war. Don't do the future war, but have it feel more grounded and modern or whatever. It's like, I want to see the future war. If you're going to do the future war, let's see the future war. It's an enjoyable enough movie. I think there are some decent elements. I thought Christian Bale honestly was pretty good as adult John Connor, and I liked the way that they added in the T-800 battle in the end. I thought that was pretty fun in a way to sort of have Arnold still be a part of the movie. But overall, it's just kind of, again, it's not the movie that I think a lot of people were hoping it was going to be when they said it was going to be, the future war. But for the most part, again, I could kind of forgive that. It's not, terrible. I think that there was definitely some wasted potential here. And again, they tried to set it up for, a trilogy where they go, it slowly gets to the point where we see what it was in the first two movies. But again, it's like, well, why not just start there and just tell a good story and then see where it goes? I don't know. But it could have been a really solid final chapter to the series if it was actually about, why Kyle Reese was sent back and how they figure out how to send, the T-800 back to, for Terminator 2. And it could have been a really great way to sort of tie all these movies together and feel like kind of a satisfying ending. And it just wasn't, I think, the movie that a lot of people were hoping it was going to be. So that's Terminator Salvation at number 5. And then at number 4, we have the most recent entry, Terminator Dark Fate. I, of course, did a proper full in-depth review on this a while back, so be sure to check that out if you haven't. I was really excited about this attempt because it, not only did it have the involvement of James Cameron back, but you also had Sarah Connor herself, Linda Hamilton finally coming back after, being absent from the past, 3 entries, this movie definitely was still pretty disappointing to me. There are definitely some elements that I appreciate about this, but overall there was just one too many things that they did, one too many choices that they made that just bugged me too much, and I found it to be, a very frustrating watch. But there definitely are some elements here and there that I appreciated that made it feel like a bit more of a stronger attempt at reviving the franchise. But ultimately, this was the one where, for me, I finally kind of got sick of the Terminator movies, and it was, when this movie ends and it's, the future war still coming and it's just kind of the same thing again, it was really the one where I was like, oh my god, this franchise really is just going around in circles, isn't it? But we're never going to go anywhere interesting with it. And it really was the one that made me go, okay, I don't need to see any more Terminator movies. They've tried so many times to reboot this thing and take it in a new direction, but it just doesn't seem to work overall. With them, killing off John Connor in the beginning and trying to, introduce a new savior and a new version of Skynet called Legion and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, why are we doing this? What is the point of all this? It's just the same thing again. Why did we feel the need to do this? I thought, honestly, even though I didn't care for a lot of the story elements and stuff, I thought that Linda Hamilton's performance in this was really solid. It didn't really work for me in the way that I was hoping. I think, honestly, for people who do enjoy some of these other sequels, that I think the only way that you could really look at them and enjoy them is to just see them as a completely alternate timeline that don't actually connect to the original 2 movies. And I think, honestly, I have to just assume for people who enjoy these other movies, particularly this one, that has to be how they look at it, that it's a completely alternate timeline, because that's honestly, to me, the only way that you can especially look at this one and try to appreciate it on its own merits. That's Terminator Dark Fate at number 4. And then at number 3, we have Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines. Doesn't deserve the hate that it gets, but I also don't think it's a particularly great film either. I do have a little bit of a soft spot for it because it was actually, the first film in the franchise that I saw. But after going back and watching the other movies and watching the first 2 movies, I definitely have softened on my enjoyment of this one a bit, but I still do think it is a pretty decent movie. I think the first half of it is pretty solid. It's a pretty solid, action movie. It was made, of course, in the early 2000s, in a time where they were still doing a lot of, big practical effects when it came to these big budget, blockbuster movies, whereas now obviously so much stuff is completely CGI generated. Again, I think the problem with this one is that it just doesn't really do anything new, and Terminator 2 was such a great sequel and arguably one of the greatest of all time, and I think that's the thing about Terminator 3, is that it just is very much, the same thing again. The new elements that they try to add to it just don't particularly work as well, so ultimately it just doesn't feel, as fresh and new and as good of a sequel as the previous movie was, and I think that's a big reason why it just doesn't work as well, which is kind of a shame in a way. But if you just kind of look at it, if you don't think too much about how, similar it is or how much of a repeat it is, I think honestly it is a pretty enjoyable movie, and I think of all the sequels after Terminator 2, I still think honestly it was the best attempt, and I think it is a pretty enjoyable movie. So that's Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines. Number 2, we have the original The Terminator. This, of course, was the film that started it all, and it's crazy to think that this movie is 40 years old now. It still honestly does hold up pretty well, just being a really, really great science fiction thriller. Almost feels like a horror movie at times. It really does just have a certain feel, mood to it that these other movies just, for the most part, other than maybe Terminator 2, just aren't able to completely recapture. And the way that it is executed is so brilliantly well done, and it's just a really, really solid, probably one of the, the greatest sort of action science fiction thriller movies of the 1980s. But the music is great, the action sequences are great, the ending is great. It's just a wonderful, great, solid movie that, I could go on all day about it, how great it is. It's a fantastic film. So that's The Terminator at number 2. And then at number 1, this of course is no surprise, we have Terminator 2, Judgment Day. One of those, few sequels that is better than the original. Not only is it honestly better than the original, but I think it pretty much is probably the greatest sequel ever made. Just because this movie is so good and it is such a well-crafted sequel, and it does such a good job of adding to the first movie whilst also being its own thing, is I think a big reason why the other Terminator films that came after this just don't stack up as well. The movie just did such a good job where we didn't really need any more Terminator movies after this. And honestly, for me personally, even though I do enjoy most of Terminator 3 and certain elements of a lot of the other movies, this to me is honestly where the timeline ends. Is that it's pretty simple, is that, they defeat Skynet and then that's the end. No more Terminator movies. And the other movies, to me, I just completely view as completely alternate, timelines, whatever. And this to me was the end of the definitive timeline. And they really made it in a way where there was no need for any more films after this. But of course, because it was so successful, every chance they've gotten, they've tried to, revive it and continue it in some new way. Still to this day, the gold standard and the prime example of how you do a sequel right. And yeah, it's just a phenomenal movie. You watch this movie now, so many elements that were so amazing about it and groundbreaking about it in 1991 still are almost just as effective now as they were back then. And it's not something you could say about a lot of blockbuster movies like this. And it's wonderfully well made. It was a wonderful spectacle of an action movie that also showed they could have a story with depth and meaning to it, and it's just an absolutely incredible, beautiful movie. I think it's easily James Cameron's best movie in my opinion, and it's easily the best of the Terminator franchise. Alright guys, there you go. That was the way that I would rank the Terminator films. Feel free to jump in the comments down below and let me know how you would rank the Terminator franchise. And until next time, be sure to consume as much entertainment as humanly possible, and I will see you in the next video.